So before the sermon this morning, I want to explain the concept of moral injury. So the point of my sermon is that we're inflicting moral injury not only on our frontline providers, but also to some of our most marginalized communities. The term moral injury was first coined in the 1990s. It was based on narratives presented by military and veteran patients, given their perception of injustice as a result of what they experienced in combat. In particular, it related to when their leaders commanded them to do something that was against their morals. Moral injury occurs when you know what is morally right to do, but someone in authority over you tells you to do something else in a very high stakes situation. About 10 years ago, moral injury, the definition was expanded to go just beyond the disconnect between a commander and a soldier. The new definition was this: perpetrating, failing to prevent, or bearing witness to acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs and expectations that may be deleterious in the long term, emotionally, psychologically, behaviorally, spiritually, and socially. Unlike PTSD, moral injury showed up in symptoms related to guilt and shame, anger, and disgust. Religious professionals, like ministers, have taken an interest in moral injury because it shows up in a lot of our religious settings, where people are trying to reconcile their morals with their actions and are looking for help in relieving that guilt and shame. But what I didn't know until I dug in further is that the term moral distress, which is the precursor of moral injury, was first used in the context of nursing. Philosopher Andrew Jameson said that moral distress arrives when one knows the right thing to do, but institutional constraints make it nearly impossible to pursue the right course of action. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, I thought so. We'll get to that in the sermon. So our son, Eric, is an EMT in Orlando, Florida. He normally works the night shift in an ambulance. He's also part of a mission team for the state of Florida to deal with the COVID-19 crisis. Eric loves working in healthcare, and similar to his mother, he believes that he got into this field just at the right time to be of use to his fellow human beings. Last Sunday night, he got a call to tell him that his mission unit was being called up. He was being deployed to the front lines. In the wee hours of the morning, he was headed to Fort Myers to conduct testing for COVID-19. I was alarmed, but not for the reasons you might think. He is a healthy young man who knows what to do to be as protected as he possibly can, and he knows what to look for in his symptoms. No, I was alarmed because of the language that they were using. So his unit was being called up. They were being deployed to the front lines. These weren't words for an EMT. This is language for a member of our military to go to war. And I've been seeing this a lot. Have you noticed it? Like, our nation has been celebrating medical providers the way that we've celebrated soldiers during wartime. We've been thanking them for their service. We've been talking about them on the front lines. We've been applauding them when they arrive for their shifts the way we have when soldiers have arrived home. We've been calling them heroes. Now, I am not saying that what they are doing is not extraordinary. It is. But this reflection is about us, not them, I think. I think that we've been doing it the way that we do it for our military is as a protection reaction. Because we know at some level, we know that the moral injury that we are inflicting on these medical providers, the same way that we have moral injury inflicted on our soldiers. And if we put them on a pedestal, then somehow we think we can protect ourselves from their pain. They are being told to save lives, but then not given all the tools to do so. They are playing the roles of family, chaplain, care provider, and family communicator, but we are not paying many of them a wage that is worthy of them putting their lives on the line like this. The same is true of our other frontline workers, the hourly workers at grocery stores, delivery services, food service, sanitation services. We're calling them heroes and we're thanking them, but we are also not paying them a living wage or providing them with adequate protection. Are we calling them heroes to thank them or to protect ourselves? Or maybe both. When this is all over, whenever that will be, I think it may be a long time. I'm beginning to think that it may be years. It is not our gratitude that they will need. It is our commitment to helping them recover from the physical, mental, and moral injuries they are encountering in our service. And that will fall to our religious institutions and our mental health providers in great part. So let's take this idea of moral injury a step further. Because if the definition is perpetrating, failing to prevent, or bearing witness to acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs, then aren't we all experiencing this to some level? I know that I am. I'm struggling to understand how our government isn't taking the loss of life as seriously as I do. I do know that we can't stay in lockdown forever and that we will need to reopen more businesses to help deeply suffering individuals. But to put the economy on the same level as human life is morally inconsistent. It's a duality that doesn't fit for me. It is perpetrating, failing to prevent, or bearing witness to acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs. When people, including our vice president, don't wear masks in healthcare facilities, or really anywhere right now, honestly, we are failing to prevent a deeply held moral belief that every life is sacred and interconnected. When our president sides with people carrying guns in Michigan's Capitol building over the public health while cases are still increasing, believe me, I feel moral injury. I'm conflicted and don't understand it. So are you tracking with me? Because this whole situation creates moral injury. For me, it helped to explain why all of this is so incredibly exhausting. We are witnessing and internally experiencing trauma. And the more that we start unweaving the tapestry of that trauma, the more moral injury we have to wrestle with. Because we are a community here at UUCP that cares about equity, let's unweave some of that tapestry together, because we need to. And so take a breath with me, because it is not just this pandemic that we need to examine. It's all of the moral injuries of the past that are leading to even more moral injury now. We know that African Americans are suffering from this virus disproportionately. A Johns Hopkins University study shows that the infection rate is threefold higher in Black communities than it is in white communities. And the death rate is 6 times higher in Black counties than white counties. 6 times. Now, this is not due just to the virus. It is because of all of the injuries that have been perpetrated over the last hundreds of years to our Black siblings, acts that have left them more in poverty, with less access to healthcare, in more crowded communities, and directly related to the redlining housing rules after World War II. Let's acknowledge that race still greatly determines where someone lives, The communities where many Black people reside are in poor areas characterized by high housing density, high crime rates, and less access to healthy foods. Low socioeconomic status is already the biggest risk factor in higher mortality rates. There's a journal, the Journal of the American Medical Association says that the most effective strategy known to reduce COVID-19 infection is social distancing. But herein lies a vexing challenge. In certain communities, there is a higher burden of at-risk health issues, the pernicious effects of adverse social determinants of health, and the absence of privilege that does not allow a reprieve from work without dire consequences for a person's sustenance, does not allow safe practices, and does not even allow for 6-foot distancing. The consequent infection and death rates due to COVID-19 complications are no longer surprising. They should have been expected. And this is a double injury because you know that our siblings of color are also being disproportionately affected by the economic conditions as well. In a study from 2019, 51% of Americans are one paycheck away from being in real financial trouble. And 20% of Americans don't have any savings to draw on after losing that one paycheck. Well, they've lost a lot more than one right now, and that will likely continue. And I really fear that when we look at who got the relief that all of our government was promising, it will be those who were most savvy and able to access it, those who had the resources already. Still breathing. Because our Indigenous siblings are suffering layers and layers of moral injury as well. Here in Arizona, we keep saying, oh, we're pretty lucky. The curve is flattened and the dire predictions haven't happened, although we are seeing signs that they have maybe more than we thought. But they have. This story is false. In the Navajo Nation, the National Guard are airlifting people to New Mexico for treatment. It is the third largest hotspot of COVID-19 after New York and New Jersey. And this comes from a long line of injury and broken promises. More than 150 years ago, the Navajo and many other tribes signed treaties with the federal government, giving up their land in exchange for funding for things like housing, infrastructure, and healthcare. But for all of that time, that hasn't happened. In fact, the continuing COVID outbreak can be directly traced to the lack of running water, lack of electricity, and lack of infrastructure. Moral injury upon moral injury. It makes me so sad and so angry. And it is a story that very few are talking about. We need to be talking about this more. And of course, our brown siblings are still in camps because of inhumane immigration policies. We could go on and on. Breathe, my beloveds. Take a deep breath. I am not saying this because I want you to feel bad. I am not saying this so you can feel guilt or shame for your own privilege. Lord knows this is already hard enough for all of us. We don't need to feel bad. What I want to say is that we cannot forget. And while we must take care of our hearts, we cannot totally look away. We have to see this. We have to see what is happening now and how it is connected to what has been happening for hundreds of years. This is not new. We have to see the full tapestry of what has gotten us here, because it will be up to us to help recreate this society in a new way when this is all over. Moral injury hurts us all when we see the harm that our history and our policies and our government have done to those who are getting most affected. When we see the moral injury that they are suffering in getting mixed messages and what they should do and what they must do, whether healthcare workers, or our Black, Brown, or Indigenous siblings. I am not free until we are all free. You are not free until we are all free. Surely this pandemic has shown us how interconnected we all are. We must all be free. Repeat after me at home. We must all be free. One more time. We must all be free. So might it be.